So when I was little, I could remember probably just more either late preschool or early grade school. I just kind of remember the sadness of my dad going off to work and leaving me and my brothers to kind of go on with our days. And there's a kind of certain sadness at his parting, but we also had this anticipation that he'd come back. And so I remember throughout the day, kind of just giving my dad his praises on the playground, being like, I have this awesome dad. My dad is so cool. And I'd share just, my love of my father with some of my other playmates, at school. And sometimes just in my immaturity, I lied about my father. And I would tell other people that, you know what he did for a living? He actually wrestles alligators. My father wrestles alligators. Just to make him sound cooler, but he was cool enough, he was a really cool attorney, but I guess that didn't, at that age, wasn't worth sharing. So yeah, so just remember kind of sharing my father, and then, me and my brothers would get back home and, we'd play around, and then close to dinner, right when our dad would be coming back, we started to get, excited about him returning. And I remember sometimes we'd go to the windows and just kind of wait there for, our dad to pull up in the driveways. And sometimes, we could get a little impatient, just kind of waiting for him. And sometimes that's when perhaps kind of doubts would enter in and be, kind of come to the back of the mind, be like, maybe my dad's not going to come tonight, or maybe he's not going to come back, or what happens if he never came back? And in today's gospel, we hear about the 11 disciples gathered up on the mountain, and Jesus is just about to ascend into heaven. And what we read is, we hear them, they saw Jesus, they worshiped, but they doubted. There was a sense of doubt at this departure. And, I think what some of this doubt comes from is, yeah, Lord, what are we to do without you here among us? Like you've been these past 3 years, these 40 days after our resurrection, how are we to proceed forward? What are we to do in this interim? And I think we could apply these words to us today, where we're all here today worshiping God, but perhaps there's a little bit of doubt, because the reality of the matter is there's a certain tension that exists in the time that we live in, because we came into this world, after the life of Christ, and so we were never eyewitnesses of Christ, and so our love and our attachment to Christ is in our faith and in the belief of what has been handed down to us. But there's this tension because, it's been 2,000 plus years, and Jesus still hasn't come, and so it's like maybe he's not going to come, or maybe he's never existed. So there's a certain tension that exists in our lives, because we could get impatient because we want God to come now. We look around ourselves and we see suffering and injustices, and we want the Lord to come down. And we kind of have that same reaction of the disciples in the first reading, where they're like, Lord, are you here to bring the kingdom of Israel? Which is, are you ready to restore this earthly kingdom and drive out the Romans? Are you ready to restore, your kingdom right now, right here, in this, in what they envision as this more temporal power? But the thing is, God's plan is so much grander, and it speaks of it. It's on His own timelines, and so we have to have a certain patience and trust that God's going to take care of these things. And the unfortunate thing is that in our impatience, what happens sometimes is we take the bringing of the kingdom into our own hands, and when we do so, we create not a heaven on earth, but more of a hell. And we've seen this in the 20th century, people who have, in their impatience with the sufferings and certain injustices of the world, taken upon themselves and be like, I have the solution. You know what? If we give more power to the state could take care of us. And we've seen, certain failures of communism in Russia, how that has turned out when we decide that our earthly kingdom could give us the peace and joy and justice that we want. And all that happens is that we create this kingdom in our own image and not of God's. And it leads, the deaths of millions in its wake, and unhappiness, and just a further desolation and doubt. So how does the Lord bring us out of this impatience, out of this doubt? He calls us to mission. He calls us out of ourselves, and He calls us to a mission much greater than ourselves. And this mission is to baptize in His name, also to observe his commandments and teach about him. So he pulls us out of our own impatience by putting us on mission. Some of this doubt that arises is not that there isn't enough work. There's almost so much work for us to do as Christians in this world that it could be intimidating, and that's where some of our uncertainty comes. But the reality of the matter is, and just my own experience, is that when we pour ourselves into mission, when we pour ourselves into sharing Christ with others, both in word and deed, when we observe his commandments, not only are we happier, but some of those doubts dispel and they fade away. The reality of the matter is, and what our faith teaches us, is that Daddy's coming back. Jesus is coming back. And the only thing that we need to be concerned in this end term is doing his will. And when we do his will, we will find happiness and peace and contentedness and joy here on this life, and in that in abundance in the world to come. So how are you living out mission today?